Hey, I'm Troye Sivan, and I'm here to answer IMDb's Take 5. You may know me from my music, or from X-Men Origins Wolverine from when I was like 13, or more recently from Boy Erased.
Play the part.
Unless you really think you can change, or even want to.
Honestly, I think the actor that inspired me most on Boy Erased was probably Lucas Hedges. I think being able to work with someone who is like so open is such a gift, especially for someone like me who has not had as much acting experience as everyone else on set.
I love God and I love my son. For your father, it's a little more complicated.
We are not finished. I am, because you won't listen.
Having him kind of be there as a support system, that was really, really helpful. Make sure you see Nicole in Moulin Rouge.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
It's like one of my favorite movies of all time. I feel like everybody has to see that movie, and she's just like brilliant in it.
So wonderful of you to take an interest in our little show.
A big part of it is her singing.
One day I'll fly away.
Like, I didn't know that Nicole could sing until I saw that movie, and she's great.
Diamonds are a girl's best friend.
I think the movie that's had the biggest impact on my life is probably The Grand Budapest Hotel.
I'm afraid that's me, darling.
I just adore that movie so much.
I knew it!
There's not a frame in that movie that I don't love.
What's the problem?
It's entertaining and it's light, but at the same time it is so like incredibly cared for and artful. I just appreciate it so much.
Right, well, you know the drill then. Zip it.
I love Inglourious Bastards.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
I feel like that movie should be required viewing for everyone. It's a good watch.
That's exactly what I expect.
It's dramatic, it's stylized, it's satisfying to watch, and the performances are just like out of this world.
Sound good?
Yes, sir!
Can I be super lame and say that Boy Erased gives me hope?
I don't want to pretend anymore.
I've had to ask myself and God if I'm ready to lose you.
I hope that this movie is going to create real change, that parents all over the world watch this movie and don't have to go through the process of sending their child to conversion therapy because they see how hurtful and damaging it can be.
I don't hate my father.
Then where is all this anger coming?
Because you're making me angry.
And so hopefully they take an alternate route after seeing this movie.
Fake it until you make it, right?